Welcome to the Urban Capital Podcast, intelligent conversations with Marceline, London, Midlands, North. So if you can start by just introducing yourself for me, please, Andrea, so that our listeners know who you are and what you do.
Okay, sure. So I'm Dr. Andrea Charles Fidelis. I work for the Ministry of Justice. I work in the Security, Order and Counter-Terrorism team currently. I work in the policy area of that. I also sit on the board, the Violent Crime Prevention Board, and I run my own company. I go around the world delivering training, so corporate training on leadership and executive skills. And so that's a bit of my professional background. There are obviously many other things about me, but that's my professional background.
Okay, so you're very much involved in, I suppose, in law in general, then, in terms of that keeping us all, I suppose, safe and that big system.
Yeah.
So you're a woman of colour. Tell us a bit about your journey then in terms of your career, because I know you've got an interesting story to tell us in a minute, but I just want to kind of people to get a picture of you and who you are as a person. As a black woman in that field, has that been a particular...
Oh, wow. So, yes, it's been a long journey. I started in the civil service whilst I was at university. So just in my third year. So when I was 21 or thereabouts, 21, 22, I went to Goldsmiths and I started as an asylum caseworker, which was pretty, it was a lot of work at those times. We used to go to work. It was at Luna House in Croydon, and we'd have the queues of asylum seekers outside and their reps, and we'd go in and pick up your caseloads for that day, and then decide the case, and you do 1 or 2 cases a day. Within a few years, I was fortunate enough. I went through a very, very difficult time with my ex-partner. So I had 2 children. One was basically we moved away when he was 2. So. And I had one 4 years older. So I had a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I was fortunate enough, God bless me, to manage to secure a job in Nigeria. So I worked for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And this is why it's significant to kind of bring in that professional background, but where my race really mattered. Or where my race, I guess, first became... a challenge and an issue, I guess, within a professional context. So leading up to that, I was new to my career, and, you're just in there doing everything. So we met. I had a massive breakup, very, very, very difficult time. It ended up being that we had to sell the house, and I was literally moving away from my safety and just trying to keep things going, learn a new job. And I think that was where identity became very challenging within the working environment. So first of all, I was there representing the British government, so that's fine. So I was with all my other expat colleagues. And then you're in a Black African country. And I'm I got this job, secured this job in manna from heaven, and moved to Nigeria with these 2 little boys as a single parent. And so naturally, you're trying to adjust, trying to keep things going, learn a new job. And I think that was where identity became very challenging within the working environment. So first of all, I was there representing the British government, so that's fine. So I was with all my other expat colleagues. And then you're in a Black African country. and I'm my mother's half Ghanaian, half English, and my dad's St. Lucian. And I grew up going to Ghana, and I'd been to Nigeria prior to going to Nigeria. So I know the West African thing and enjoyed, Afrobeats and things like that. At that time, we're talking about 2006. It wasn't as big as it was now, but I still kind of, it was emerging. It was great. Yeah. But race, I think within that context was difficult. So you have the Nigerian staff, for example, like locally engaged staff that see you as one thing. And you're able to empathize more because many of the staff that went over there, the English staff, or Scottish, whatever, felt they were under siege because it was a hardship posting. And people go with all kinds of preconceptions, and so you'd have a conversation with some people and they'd say, I only go to the school, I go to the shop, and I go home, and they were under siege. Now for me it was a playground because I didn't quite feel that air of course you have to be, as diplomats, there is certain protections afforded to you, but you have to be aware of things that come your way and temptations. As I said, because you can empathize and connect more with some of the staff, that can bring forward its own kind of challenges and issues. So you have to be kind of on your guard. But I think one of the examples of, it was very challenging because I think if you were in any position of power there, the white staff would not really want to take on board your leadership, so to speak. So there was a lot of being voiceless and kind of know your place thing going on. And then there's cliques and, you live in a bubble. It was the best time of my life, but it was also a very challenging time. I was I was about 28 at the time with these two children. And, it was incredible. I did once I found my feet, within about 6 months, 7 months, I began to connect with some, I called them charity bums, but some charity guys that used to just go around and do good things. So they weren't that organized. But they were really good at resource mobilization. So they were able to get loads of people to donate things. And so every month we would go to different orphanages and hand out the things that had been brought and things like that, and kind of just keep an eye on things. So I decided to do a charity disco so that we could raise money for it. For the cause. It wasn't, you didn't give money, you only gave products. So we would raise money, and then we ended up with that money. I raised about £4,000, and we ended up putting water tanks into some of these orphanages. Yeah. However, I was doing what we called a school days disco with 70s, 80s kind of music and dress up. So we had like the Afro wigs and it was school day. So we were replicating our uniforms. And that was my thing. I've got all the pictures documenting it and everything. It was a great experience. But you get this thing whereby you're given the authorization to lay on this type of event. And we happened to lay on to keep prices down. We did it at the diplomatic compound. So we had a bar there and a space there. And I got people to donate a DJ and lighting and food and things like that. Right. And but there was this air there where people want you to not succeed. So everything was so much harder. And because I was bringing Nigerian people, albeit mostly very wealthy people, onto the campus to engage for the night, it was really, really challenging. And while we were there was, I just felt that as a member of staff, I didn't get the support, but I got through it, and we built up really good relationships with other members of staff, particularly staff of colour. We all kind of stuck together, and everybody integrated, of course, but there's certain things that you shared about the experiences. Yeah.
And that's because it leads me to another point, is that as black women, and I know, well, as black people in general, but obviously the two of us are black women, so I'm talking from personal experience as well, is that often it is a bit of a shock, isn't it, when we go into a work environment, especially a professional environment, and you've studied, you've trained, you've developed your qualifications, etc. And then you go into what you naively walk into certain environments. It's not all, but I think personally, perhaps still too many. And you suddenly faced with this shock of, actually, I've got all these other underlying sort of almost hidden racial things, whether they're stereotypes, whether they're assumptions, whether it's us having to constantly check our behaviour. Would you say that you'd agree with that, in terms of it's something we're not always prepared for?
Absolutely. Let me bring a couple of incidents I've experienced recently, beyond, before we talk about the main thing.
Yeah.
Two things. This is really interesting. So about a year ago, my son was going to, January, at the beginning of 2019, my son at the time was 18, and he was going to Uganda to do some charity work. We'd had a difficult time with him from the age of 17 to 18. You can imagine there's a lot of things going out there, lots of things that they gravitate to, and college wasn't working for him, and I convinced him to go to Uganda and do some voluntary work, because I've been around international development, which has been an interest of mine since being in Nigeria, and I know that there's something called VSO, an organisation where they have a youth scheme, and unfortunately a lot of he was the only black person on that delegation going to Uganda, but it's open to all young people in this country, and it's part paid for by the government. So we were able to take advantage of that, given my access to the information, and I've really pressed him to try and promote it as well in schools and on his social media, so that it's a bigger thing that people can do. So I said to my manager, so it was around Christmas time, that's it, he was going in January, and we were having Christmas lunch, and I said to my manager, my son's going to Uganda. I was proud, he's young and he's going to have a great time and learn lots of things about himself, because he was in a village. And he said, well, something like, to words to the effect, at least he's not going to juvenile prison.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this was last year. So he said, straight like that, he said, wow, at least he's not going to prison. And I was stunned, to say the least. I was not very hungry by that point. But I was in insecure employment at that time. I was kind of agency, so I left the service, long history, and went back. So I was insecure at that time and didn't take it further. In fact, I didn't feel that it was something I could go into, that I was in that space to do it. I didn't have secure employment, as I said. And B, I was genuinely stunned by that. And this has reared its ugly head again, whereby I was in a situation where I took my other son for an EEG, and this was even more recently. So this was late last year, and we were met by the specialist nurse. It's quite I wouldn't say challenging time, but you're obviously there because there's an issue, and they need to look at some of his neurology, right? And the nurse, we sat down, and the nurse said to him, how old are you? And he said 15. And he said, old enough to go to prison, soon old enough to go to prison.
Wow, there's a theme here, isn't there?
And he said that in front of me. Yeah. And that went into, I've been in a long back and forth with the King's College about that. And there was other comments made as well. And this is how I'm experiencing having black children. So this racism, basically, I think the generalized perception, I think this will take us to a general perception of young black males and what their trajectory is, or what the expectations are around how they live their life and where they will go to. And this is something that has hit me as a mother, I didn't see that coming. I didn't see it coming, and now has become a theme.
Yeah.
And so I think you cannot detach identity and race from our ordinary experiences.
Absolutely not. And I think as mothers as well, as you said to young black men, is, as you said, even if we know they're black their whole life, but that's not the kind of first and foremost thing that we're thinking about. But then, like you said, they hit teenage, those ages, like you said, a stereotype, where they're going out, obviously, into the bigger world without us more, and experiencing things on their own. And when they're coming back with certain questions or certain experiences, that's actually when it hits home, and you think, oh my gosh, all those extra things that we carry as parents in that respect. And, you know, unfortunately, it's almost like an additional concern. I mean, it's worrying enough when you have teenage children. But tell us about what happened to you recently, because we've hit on, you know, and I'm sure we're going to probably come back to that. We've hit on some of the experiences of young black males, but as a black woman, a mother, a married woman, you had your own experience very recently, didn't you? Talk to me about that.
Sure. So this was actually on the 29th of March. It was a Sunday, and it was just before 6 o'clock, and we're in quarantine time. So, you know what that carries with it. And so, you know, I wanted to go out a little bit earlier for my jog. My husband and I had been going out around just as it gets dark and going out for our jogs. And I wanted to kind of have a glass of wine, to be honest. So I thought, let's get this out of the way and then I can kind of relax for my evening.
Yeah.
And so he said, no, he's going a bit later on. So I said, okay, fine. Got on my glad rags, which, you know, your normal jogging stuff. I didn't take my phone, and I hadn't been taking my phone. So, you know, I didn't feel I needed to, but clearly you'll hear why it's probably important to not go out without your phone.
Yeah.
So I just literally left, and I thought, let me walk down the road, warm up a bit. And then when I get to the top of the hill, I live in Kent. And when we get to the top of a road, then I'll start the jog.
Yeah.
So I live in a cul-de-sac, right at the end of it. And so it was like about a 2-minute walk down the road. And as I got to the corner of my road, this van, so it was a white van, turned up and pulled up and pulled down the window, wound down the window. And he was like, why were you, he was kind of really exercised. He was red. He was, you know, really angry. Yeah. I didn't get it. So he was like, why were you on my drive? And I said, excuse me. I couldn't believe it. I said, what are you talking about? I said, I've just walked down this road. Hang on, I stopped here. But yeah, that wasn't, you know, anything. And he said, my son saw you. Why were you by my car? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, well, why were you touching my car? I said, look, I live here. I said, what are you talking about? I'm going for a jog. I live here. So he's shouting, where do you live? Where do you live? I'm thinking, well, I don't know you. And my house is very distinctive. So I thought, this is long. So I just said, look, you know, enough already. And I carried on walking. As I'm walking, he's now driving alongside me, tailing me in a way. And I'm walking now up a road, and he's still kind of talking. And then as we get to the top of the road, he says, I'm going to call the police. So I said, suit yourself. But I'm thinking, he's just not leaving me alone. It was weird. So I turn right and I start jogging as planned. And he's still tailing me. And he's kind of talking. I can hear him kind of in the van saying, she's turning right, heading north, you know, something like that. So I'm kind of jogging along and kind of laughing a bit and just thinking, this is so weird. This is bizarre. And a passerby walks by me, smiles kind of and carries on walking, a very old man. And I carry on, and it's significant because as I'm jogging down, we go over a bridge and I'm jogging towards some country roads. It dawns on me, hang on a minute, I have this van by me, and the last person I saw is way back in the distance, and there is no witnesses. I have no phone. I felt really frightened, like I froze for a moment.
And at this point, I presume he's been following you for quite some time from what you've just described.
Yes, yeah, we've come out of my road, turned right along a bridge. So I'm like, And I had these kind of visions that what if he mounts the pavement? You know, you kind of look around, you think there's no one around. What if he jumps out? Like what? So I thought, let me go back and try and maybe alert the man that I saw before. So I turned round, and at this point, he's actually reversing down the main road to try and keep in tow with me. So he's going in the opposite direction, reversing down a road instead of driving.
Terrifying.
Absolutely. So I'm now running, kind of shouting towards the man in the distance until he gets close enough to hear me. And I said, look, this man is following me. I don't know what's going on. So he said, well, call the police. And I said, I don't have a phone. And he kind of clutched his phone and crossed over. So I carried on. And this van has now span round and he's now in hot pursuit again. So I'm jogging along, but just thinking I need to get to safety. I need to get to safety. So as I go down and I'm heading towards my road, I suddenly think again, oh my God, if I show up to my house with this guy, it's going to kick off with my husband going to come out. Perhaps my sons will come out. The police have been called. So I had a flash moment. I'm literally petrified, and I just ran in the direction of a train station, which is really close to where we live. I went through an alley, ran, thinking he might jump out and chase me. But at this point, I've just got to get to safety and get to where I can be, you know, there's a witness, so to speak. Yeah. But what he does is he rushes, you know, all the way around in a circle. And so as I go down the stairs of this alley, he's now driving towards me in the station car park. I run into the station, everything's locked up, COVID-19, and I just press one of those, you know, the assistance things. So I'm pressing this, and I said, is anybody here? And he said, yes. I said, look, I'm in fear of my life. There's a man chasing me in a van. He says, come down to platform 1. I'm in the office. I rush down. As I get into the office, he shuts the door. He said, you're safe now. And we can see on the big screen, the CCTV, first of all, the man's kind of circling slowly around the car park. Then he gets out and he's pacing up and down the platforms, the stage. It was weird. It was
sounds very weird.
So the station guard says, let's call the police. We call the police. And as I'm going through my name and blah, 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 a police officer shows up on the camera. So the station guard runs out and says, she's here. She's in fear of her life. And so I'm left in the office.
So the station manager or the station guard is thinking that this officer has responded to his call.
Well, he knew that he had called the other guy had called the guy in the van called. So he's just like, there's a police officer. We need help. Unbeknown to me, so I'm still standing in the office alone. Mm-hmm. Unbeknown to me, as they both rush back. So the police officer's running up the platform. And I can hear the station guard. She's in fear of her life. She's here. And before he saw me, I heard him shout, she's not in fear of her life. She's just tried to steal a car.
And this is the police officer.
This is the police officer. And the station guard says, oh, I didn't know that. And I was like, and they both now barge into the room, door flies open. And I was totally frozen. I was really shocked, you know, and I said, excuse me. I was polite as my usual self. I said, excuse me. I said, how can you say I'm not in fear of my life? I said, this man has chased me around. I don't know, this stranger in a van, he could have done anything. He said, you're not in fear of your life. You tried to steal his car, repeats it to me. This was the first I'd heard of stealing a car, because he had said, you were on my drive, you touched my car, my son saw you. But I had made no leap in my mind to anything to do with stealing a car. Why would I? And so there's back and forth with this officer and myself. And I'm like, I couldn't get over that. I just couldn't. And I was like, you can't say that. So he says, what do you think he was going to do? If he was going to do anything, he would have. He wasn't going to do anything. What do you think he would do? Run you over? He would have. He said, or get out and attack you. He said, you're fit and well. You can defend yourself. I said, you've just barged in here. This is before a single question.
This is shocking.
I said, you've barged in here accusing me of trying to steal a car. he said, the information I had was a mixed race woman in her 30s in a pink hoodie and black leggings. That's you. Tried to steal a car. That's you. And I was like, wow, this is it was so surreal. I felt really humiliated. And I was petrified. I was in shock. I was petrified. I just couldn't believe that was being accused. I am not your atypical car theft type of person. So it just didn't register, and there was back and forth. And then he said, well, I'm going to talk to the man. And he went off and talked to the man, came back in and carried on. And said that he could arrest me. And I said, look, you can't arrest me. I said, I've done nothing wrong. And at that point he said, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I work for the Ministry of Justice in counterterrorism. And he said, and his complete demeanor changed. He was like, well, let me go and talk to the man, because actually no story is ever 100%. And I was like, no, I'm 100%. I'm a jogger. I live 2 minutes from here.
Just to be clear, because I don't want to interrupt you, but just to be clear and to kind of just recap on that, just to make sure that everyone is clearly following everything you've just said. So you've gone out for a jog. We know that, we know that middle bit in terms of this random stranger that comes along. The point is, when the policeman arrives, okay, now let's be fair in the first instance that he's been called to by this person in the van saying that somebody's been on his drive. The story's escalated to somebody stolen a car. When the police officer arrives, he finds a woman in her 40s who, black woman in her 40s in bright pink jogging top, I think you said, wasn't it?
Yes,
when we talked earlier. Lycra, the works, jogging gear. Yeah. And you're accused of stealing this gentleman's car.
Yes.
Shocking. So there was no level of judgment made in terms of what was before him, in terms of, as you said, you are not you do not appear an atypical car thief. So even if there were lots of car thefts, we're presuming that they're not being carried out by 40-odd-year-old black women.
In jogging gear. So,
in jogging
gear. I mean, you couldn't make it
unbelievable. I know.
It's painful. I know. It's you can see I'm struggling to articulate the words, because there's so much at stake with my reputation, I have higher level security clearance, with everything that I do, and to just be demeaned, it's bizarre. Like, nobody who knows me would ever think that I am a car thief. I don't look like one. They're just a couple of simple questions could have cleaned it up. I was in an area, I was next to home going for a jog. It was circumstantially, that was, clear, evident. And still there was back and forth. Still, after all of that, there was a threat to arrest me while they investigate, he said. And I think it's interesting for me to add as well, after all of this back and forth, he then says, I'm going to go and check if there's any damage to the car. Now, I didn't touch this car.
Yeah.
I wasn't on the drive. I have no idea what's going on. Where is the, it's not even to do with trust. It's like I had no credibility. I felt completely dehumanized. I was deemed to have not had the natural feelings of being frightened for my life.
Yeah.
After being, put through an ordeal, I wasn't given that. There was no scope he left no room for me to have been a victim in this circumstance. And I think if you go into a situation as a police officer, you need to be impartial and objective at the outset. And you gather your information, and then you make whatever, you progress it in whichever ways right. But this was not the way. And it's left me very, very, very very broken, very, very anxious, emotionally. There's a lot to unpack in this situation. And there are wider implications with the work I do and how I feel in my community. I think also to add that when we left the office and we went back to my drive and where this now I know it's a neighbour lived, I was standing on my drive and I had my car and my husband's car behind me, and my husband was now standing with me. And the police officer came along, and so did the accuser. He was in his pajamas and looked very dishevelled and very fragile of mind, which I think he is.
So just to be clear, this is the person that was in the van originally? So that whole time he was chasing you, he'd been in his pajamas?
I think he must have been, because unless he went home and got changed into pajamas, which was weird. And I just wanted to add the pajamas bit because, I was like, okay. And when he came so the police officer joined us on the drive, and then the man walked over right behind him. And the police officer said, I think there's been a misunderstanding. And I was like, no, there's no misunderstanding. I haven't done anything. I went for a jog. And the man turns around to the police officer and he says, I've checked the car. There's no damage to the car. Again, I became totally kind of, angry. I became really angry. And I said, look, I've got cars. What am I going to do? Honestly, try and steal a car from my neighbour and put it where? On my drive along with our other cars? It just doesn't make any sense.
And add to that, you're going to choose to do it in your Lycra jogging gear.
Even with no tools, nothing, no gloves, nothing. The whole thing was just a mess. And I spoke about it with a friend, and she was like, at this point, because I was like, it wasn't closed properly. There was no closure. I wasn't vindicated. I wasn't in any way recognised as being who I was in that situation. And that was being a victim of a false accusation, a victim of racism as well. There was no, he didn't take any responsibility for that. He didn't connect with me, even when he knew. So when we left the office, he knew that I wasn't a car thief. But there was no compassion, there was nothing given to me that would have been able to restore the dehumanizing process that he had put me through. And I feel that at the end, a police officer, a good police officer or a professional police officer would have closed it down and said, I'm convinced there is no crime has taken place. And I think you owe this person, this is your neighbour, sir, I think you owe her an apology. And that would have somehow, in some way, kind of made it clear in that neighbour's mind that, look, this is frivolous. And in my mind, it would have said, okay, you are vindicated. But he wouldn't even afford me that. He wouldn't give me that satisfaction. He just had to say, I think it's a misunderstanding, and leave it at that. And so I'm a victim.
Even presuming that neighbour, I don't know, woke up in the wrong mood that day, got the wrong information, etc., etc. Once, you realise that, a horrible mistake has been made, even as the neighbour, you'd have hoped that once he saw you, he'd have thought, well, actually, she doesn't look like somebody. And I'm not saying you know what somebody looks like who's a car thief, but we know what somebody looks like. I know what you look like, and I can take one look at you and know that I don't know how anyone would see for somebody. I mean, I can't put it into words because I was so shocked when I heard about what had happened. So the point is, you would just think that even just human decency, that somebody would have said, look, I'm horrified and I'm so sorry. But not even that. And then the police officer that comes along, you would hope human decency, forget what you do for a living. There's been something awful's happened. You've even realised that this lady has actually been traumatised by the experience that she's just had, and still nothing. And when we talked about this earlier, we were saying it does make you think again about what a lot of young black males are experiencing, because fortunately we don't, as black women in our 40s, we don't often experience this directly, but we are so aware of it because of our sons or brothers or whatever. And it's worrying on that level as well, isn't it? In terms of thinking that there are those officers, I'm just going to put it out there, that don't seem to have any kind of connection with people in the community, or you know, it's easy to presume that they have this kind of racial block. So, and that's what it feels like sometimes as a black person. Is that how? Would you agree with that in terms of your experience?
Yes, I agree with that. And I would take it one step further. And I would say, if race is a barrier, and if you dehumanize somebody, then you can do anything to them and not feel that you are doing something to a person, because that person doesn't have human feelings and doesn't deserve human rights and doesn't deserve to be given the benefit of the doubt, or even to be, seen as a victim.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, whole systems of oppression have been built on that.
Right.
Haven't they?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is that's the subtext to what's happening. So for me, I feel very much like I've been assaulted. Literally, I feel like I've been physically assaulted because it feels so damaging, because I feel so raw, I feel so confused, and because I've not been through a process of being dehumanized.
Yeah, it's almost, it feels emotionally abusive. So as you said, you won't have a physical mark, but the emotions that you have to manage and deal with and suppress, because if you react in the wrong way, so it's emotional abuse.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to be controlled, and you have to be measured, and you have to try and negotiate your way out, you know, of a situation which quite clearly, I was being, my back was against the wall. I was being threatened with, which holds much bigger implications in my life for me to be arrested and embroiled in, another thing is, what if there had been some damage on the man's car that was there anyway, random stuff or something that happened? What would the implication be then? There needed to have been a couple of questions which made him understand how there was a leap between somebody being on a drive, which nobody was on the drive, as it happened. Who saw that person? Was it a son? How old was the son? There's an allegation of a car being touched. What then makes you think that that car is being broken into, yet there's no damage to the car? So what was going on in that person's mind? And was he angry and unable to control the situation? Therefore, he wanted to fabricate his accusation, his allegation, in order to hurt the person that he, had targeted. And so there needs to be that level of dialogue and that level of questioning and inquiry. And two people need to be seen as human beings. We don't know who that man was. That man could have been anybody. And he just barged in, as me and so I think that process of being dehumanized, and I think that came very much significant to the timing. So after enduring a situation where you feel genuinely in fear of your life, where you're being chased around, where you could be run over, then to have a tirade and be bombarded with accusations and judgment and threats off the back of that. So the body's already gone through. I'm a woman as well. I'm not to say that men don't have feelings, but there was, because they absolutely do. But where is my vulnerability? Where is as a victim in this, as somebody who's been falsely accused of something, where is my justice? Where is my protection? Where is my voice? Nowhere. And this has been life-changing. This is life-changing.
You said a moment ago that it's had an impact on how you even feel within your community. What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So I sit at New Scotland Yard at least once a month, if I'm not attending additional events with police officers. Part of the role of the Violent Crime Prevention Board is to kind of mediate and to change and improve relations with police. And I think when you sit down and you're trying to work to promote the police into communities, but on your doorstep, you are dehumanized and brutalized by a police officer. It causes you to question what your kind of priorities are and what the realities are of actually what you're doing. And so I think what I want to come out of this are two main things. One, I want to be acknowledged for having been assaulted. So I want to be in a space where my actual feelings and experience can be reviewed and responded to. And secondly, I would like to impact on policing in the respect of trying to tackle that key area of when you dehumanize somebody, and that's these young men, that's other women. When you do that, we get into a very dangerous space. And so I'd like to do everything I can to bring about some constructive change.
Yeah. Just it's important to point out that you did actually make a report, didn't you, in terms of reporting the incident that happened to you, and what actions have been taken? Did you receive an apology perhaps then, or from his superior, that officer's superiors, or anything?
No. So on the day I submitted a complaint, I was advised to do so, which I did. And I haven't yet. It's still going through the process of review, but there hasn't been any forthcoming apology at this point. Okay.
So, well, it'll be interesting to see what the response is from above in terms of and I do hope that you do at the very least get the apology that you deserve. I mean, the work that you do is so important.
Thank you.
For the whole country. I mean, many people might not understand what you do, but it is extremely important work. And often, as citizens of a country like this, we have the privilege that we don't always know what's happening on the edges. Or you talked about your work, your earlier career, abroad, at diplomatic corps, things like that. It's really important work. So for somebody like you, nobody should be experiencing, I think, that type of behaviour anyway, or treatment. But for somebody like you to then, that's almost like what you get back in return from, another. Yeah. So it's shocking, and as a black woman, I'm sorry that you experienced that, and I think it's important that we have these conversations and we don't accept these things as it's the norm or other people won't understand, so let's brush it under the carpet. And we shouldn't ever get used to it, in my opinion. So I really appreciate your open and honest frankness and, talking to us about yourself and the experience that you had. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing my story.
And you're welcome. Urban Capital: lifestyle, society, entertainment, news, politics, economics. Urban Capital: London, Midlands, North.